All right, Rabbi, good morning, a good tavach. It is such a schos Baruch Hashem to be able to start another week of learning together. We begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tammuz. Daniel and Batsheva Pava of Chashmonaim, Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shemer and Drushos this month in recognition of their father, Rabbi Shlomo ben Yehuda Aryeh of Philadelphia, on the occasion of his first yahrzeit. Rabbi Shlomo was a child survivor of Auschwitz, Talmud Mufak of Rav Michal Ber Weissmandel. He's left behind 90 plus descendants who are Baruch Hashem all Yirei Shamayim. His neshama have an aliyah and family a nechama. We also, of course, dedicate our learning. Lili Nishmas, we read in Matzah Shabbos, saw the news of Matzah Shabbos, the terrible attack on the Jewish town in the north that left 12 people killed, 11 of them children. An overwhelming and dramatic, the Druze community in Eretz Yisrael is one that is tremendously dedicated to the welfare of the state, rises to high levels in the military. And it's important for us to recognize that part of the beauty of the contemporary state of Israel is that it serves as a homeland, not just to the Jewish people, but Baruch Hashem is one of the few places in the Middle East that has a tolerance for other groups as well. And the notion that children could be out playing soccer and literally, again, be hit by a missile that tears them to pieces, is you watch some of the video and some of the footage from the funerals that are happening today, and it's absolutely overwhelming. Absolutely overwhelming. We hope that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give the neshamas and aliyah, their families a nechama. And we hope that Emir Hashem, in the merit of our learning, it should be a week of Besoros Tovos for all of Klal Yisrael, for all the residents of Eretz Yisrael, and how HaKadosh Baruch Hu should shower us with the bracha that seems to be most elusive, the bracha of Shalom. Bracha of Shalom. May it be a week in which our hostages, Emir Hashem, come home, in which our soldiers are successful, B'chol Ma'aseh Yadeim, and again, may be Zoch Emir Hashem to share Besoros Tovos for all of Klal Yisrael. Well, with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Lamed Gimel 33. We are picking up Emir Hashem. I just have to say, it's just important for us also. What was amazing is, I'm sure all of us follow the news all the time. What was incredible to see is how, in the aftermath of this attack, so the UN, of course, again, in its always very balanced approach to everything, urges restraint on all sides. However, it's important to understand that when a missile falls and tears children apart, that there's no restraint for something. I'm not giving military advice or political advice. I'm just saying how it is so clear that the world has absolutely lost its moral clarity. When someone launches missiles indiscriminately and blows up children, tears them to shreds while they're playing soccer, the word balance or the word restraint doesn't have a place anymore. You're dealing with the purest and sheerest of evil. And there is only one way to deal with evil. It is not at the negotiating table. It is not with words. It is through brute force. That is the only thing that evil in this world understands. It's just amazing. Sometimes the tragedies of our people are compounded by the absolute sheer stupidity and vacuousness of the world. It is amazing to see that almost a year into this war, and the world does not see what we are up against. Kadosh Baruch Hu, I used to daven a lot for the world to have clarity. I stopped davening for that because I recognize it's a tfilas shav. It's a meaningless prayer because it is clear the world is not going to find clarity. Instead, Chavra, what we daven for, Kadosh Baruch Hu should give our leaders the strength to make the right decisions. Hashem should give the strength to our military to be mighty and to be fearless. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us the staying power to be able to do what needs to get done in order to usher in a period of safety and security for Am Yisrael and for Eretz Yisrael. I will say, let's begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. Actually, again, some nice shorter dapim coming up. But Emir Hashem, again, beautiful lessons, beautiful halachas. Let's begin. So today's daf is Lamed Gimel 33. And we are picking up on Lamed Beis, Amud Beis 32b, 4 lines up from the bottom. Rava bar Sharshum nafak alei kala da'achal aradi yasmi. It's an interesting case here. So Rava bar Sharshum. So again, word went out that he was consuming the land of Yisomim. So in other words, just to understand what's happening over here. So a rumor started circulating that Rabbi Bar Sharshum was going ahead and using land that was not his. So that's part one. To compound it, to make it a little bit worse, it was the land of Yisomim. It was the land that belonged to orphans. Okay, so what happens? So we'll say, so now obviously you could imagine, so people are very upset about this. Rabbi Bar Sharshum is going ahead and using land that doesn't belong to him, land that you see some. I suppose it's incredible. I'm going to Abaye. So Abaye says, okay, so obviously this case is brought to Abaye, the situation is brought to Abaye. And Abaye says, Eimalei, easy gufa de uvda hechiava. Abaye said, tell me exactly what happened. And I was saying, what a tremendous Musar Haskell, one line into this Gemara. So right, Abaye hears this inflammatory story. Rabbi Bar Sharshum is using property of Yisomim. Can you believe it? The chutzpah and avla and aveira. He's going and taking advantage of orphans who can't advocate for themselves. It's so terrible, it's so horrible. They come to Abaye, you got to do something. What does Abaye say? Why don't you tell me the information? Let's say, such a tremendous Musar Haskell. How often in life do we hear part of a story and we're already ready to act, we're already ready to condemn, we're already ready to take action, and meanwhile, again, it turns out that we're missing wide swaths of information. So Abaye models for us how you deal with when confronted with what appears to be some pretty incredible or overwhelming or inflammatory information. Make sure you get the whole story. So Abaye says, tell me the story. Now Abaye says, not only that, who does Abaye go to for all the details of the story? He goes to Rabbi Bar Sharshum. He goes to Rabbi Bar Sharshum. This isn't the normal Rabbi of the Gemara. He goes to Rabbi Bar Sharshum. Explain to me, right? So go to a primary source. Go to a primary source. Don't get your information from secondary sources. Go to the primary source and get all the information. Rabbi Bar Sharshum, what happened? Okay, so does it, Rabbi, I'll tell you what happened. I'm late. Listen to this. Listen to this. Rabbi Sharshum, first of all, Sibbo says it's been a little while since we've had this. Remember again, a mashkanta desura. You remember that? Back from our Bava Metzia days, what's a mashkanta de surah? So again, it's in a typical way, a simple way. I lend Reuven $10,000. So what happens? Reuven gives me a piece of land, and let's say again the yield from that land is worth approximately $1,000 a year. So I use that land for 10 years, and at the end of 10 years, what does Reuven owe me? What does he owe me? Nothing, because essentially what we've done is we've paid off the debt through the use of the land. That is called the mashkanta de surah, because apparently in the city of Surah, this was a very common way in which to go out and pay off debts. So Rabbi Bar Sharshum says to Abaye like this. First of all, these Yisomim, I had lent their father money. Their father had given me a piece of land in this mashkanta de surah arrangement. So I'm using this land for a number of years in order to pay down the debt. Fine. V'havili. Furthermore, Rabbi Bar Sharshum said, "V'havili both top of Lamed Gimel. V'havili zuzi achrina gabe." Now listen. Now, in addition, now that was loan one. So Rabbi Bar Sharshum said, "I had lent the father of these orphans money. I lent him $10,000. He gave me the field for 10 years. By the end of 10 years, again, we were going to call it even. The debt was going to be repaid. But there was another debt. There was another debt. In other words, the father of the Yisomim borrowed another $5,000 from me." And now what happens? Look at Rashi. Zuzi achrini gabe shenischayev li shein mashkon alehen. Now this is very interesting. Let me tell you this outside, then we'll look at it inside. So essentially, Rabbi Bar Sharshum says like this: I essentially lent the father of the Yisomim 2 loans. One loan, we'll call it $10,000, was secured by property, this mashkanta de surah arrangement. The second loan was not collateralized. Second loan was not collateralized. Now, again, Rabbi Bar Sharshum says, I have a note, so it's clear ultimately, again, that the money is owed to me. So Rabbi Bar Sharshum essentially makes the following cheshbon. Let's talk about it outside, then we'll do it inside. And it's a good cheshbon. He says, you know what? To collect debts from Yisomim is a tremendous headache, as we'll talk about in just a moment. So Rabbi Bar Sharshum says, here's what I thought I would do. I was already holding on to that mashkanta de surah to go ahead and pay off the first debt of $10,000. Rabbi Bar Sharshum said, I figured I would just keep that piece of property for another couple of years in order to pay off the second debt. That was it. That's the case over here. So now let's see it inside. Rabbi Bar Sharshum said, the father of the Yisomim owed me a second debt of $5,000. Now, I have already finished using the property for the duration of the mashkanta de surah. Right, so we'll call it for the duration, let's call it for 10 years, right? So already I've used the property long enough to go ahead and pay off the $10,000 debt, which was the mashkanta d'sura, which was the debt for which this property was collateralized. And I figured to myself, I said to myself, if I give back this land now to the Yisomim, and now I come back and I say to them, guys, again, your father owes me, your father, Zichron Livracha, so sorry for your loss. But, right, he owes me $5,000, right? So your father owes me another $5,000. And again, remember, we'll say, this is all documented, right? This is all papered. Rava Bar Sharshim has the loan document. He says, so what's the problem? The rabbi said, what's the problem? Also, the problem is, we know that when it comes to collecting from nichsei somim, from orphans, even if you have a loan document, I was well say generally the way it works in loans is whoever holds the document is the one who has the power. So in other words, if I have a document that says I lent Ruben $5,000 and I have the document, I have the power to collect. So this changes when it comes to Yisomim. Remember again, whenever you want to collect from the estate of orphans, you always have to swear. Chazal instituted that in order to safeguard the Yisomim. So Rav Bar Sharshim says, here's the problem. If I now come to collect the second debt, the second $5,000, or the second loan of $5,000, even though I have a document, I'm still going to have to swear, because the rabbi said, and I will say, by the way, we've learned this many times before, that's in order to protect the Yisomim, right? Or often children are not versed in the affairs of their father's estate. So in order to protect the Yisomim, Chazal said you have to take a shvuah before you go ahead and collect. So the Gemara says, so therefore Rav Bar Sharshim said, I don't want to swear. So Rav Bar Sharshim said, here's what I was going to do. I was going to hide the loan document. In other words, hide it means I wasn't going to present the loan document, and I simply was going to get repaid for the second loan through continued use of the property. And I figured this way again, I'm going to get what's rightfully mine through a piece of property that I'm already holding on to, and I could avoid the need for a shvuah. I could avoid the need for an oath. And what's the logic? I'll go ahead and I'll consume the amount, right? I'll use the land corresponding to the amount of the second debt, and I'll say like this: Demigo di ba'ina amina lakucha hi biyadi mehemna. And listen to this, this gets better. Rav Bar Sharshim says, I'll tell you why I should be entitled to do this, because I have a migo. What's the migo? The migo is I could have claimed that this land, that's the mashkanta d'sura, I could have claimed that it's mine. I could have claimed that, in fact, ultimately, again, I had bought it beforehand, right? I bought it from the father of the Yisomim, because remember, again, I've been using it already longer than the years of Chazakah. So listen to this, Demigo di bayamina lakucha hi biyadi. I could have gone ahead and said the property was really purchased by me from the father. Ki amina de isli zuzei gabaycho mehemna. Therefore, certainly now when I tell you, no, I don't own it, but I'm only using it in order to go ahead and pay off the second debt, I certainly should be believed. Okay, so I will say, this is the whole story. So first of all, it's interesting, right? So now you understand why people were talking about Rav Bar Sharshim. They weren't wrong. They were saying, listen, he is illegally using the property of Yisomim. Now, were they wrong? Right? No, not totally wrong. But yet Rav Bar Sharshim has a very interesting cheshbon over here. So once again, let's go over the cheshbon once more. So Rav Bar Sharshim says, listen, father owes me two loans. We'll call it one for $10,000, one for $5,000. The $10,000 loan was secured by a mashkanta d'sura arrangement. I was going to use the property for 10 years, pay off the debt. Fine. 10 years have gone by. Now, the other debt of $5,000 for which I have a document, Rav Bar Sharshim says, is still outstanding. Here's the problem. If I go through the normal mechanism of collecting that debt, then I'm going to have to swear, because that's only to collect from Yisomim. I don't want to swear. So instead I figured, you know what, I'll just hold on to the property that I already have and pay off the remaining $5,000 debt through continued use of that property. Now, where does Rav Bar Sharshim think that he has the right to do that? Right? Where does he get this that he has the right to do it? So he thinks he has the right to do it because of a migo. What's his migo? I could have claimed that the property was mine altogether. Because I could have made the claim that ultimately father, right, now deceased father, right, alav shalom, we're in Baltimore, alav shalom, right? So ultimately, again, I could have gone ahead and said that the father sold it to me. Therefore, again, it's mine. I consumed it already the years of chazakah. So now when I say, listen, I'm not even claiming ownership over it. I'm just using it to pay off the second debt. That should work. Okay, so we'll say. That's the story. That's Rabbi Bar Shamshum's story. So the Gemara says, now Abaye hears this. Amrle, Abaye says, no. L'kucha biyadi lo matzis amris. So Abaye says, actually, your migo is not a good migo. You would have never had the ability to go ahead and claim that the property was sold to you. Why not? Da'ika ala kala da'ardiyasmihi. Very simply because there's a kol. What's the kol? They'll say, what's the call? The call is that this is property owned by the Yisomim. So your migo already wouldn't have worked. In other words, you think you had the ability to claim that it was sold to you. That's not true because there is a competing call. And we'll say again, call, it's hard. I don't know that there's a good English word for call. We often call it like a rumor, but it's not. But in this case, it's more like a, Common knowledge is more like a situational common knowledge. A situational common knowledge that this property was owned by the Yisomim. So therefore, your mi goes out the window. Ella. So therefore, again, Rava, here's what you have to do. Ella zil ahadranelo. Give back the property to the Yisomim. Give back the property to Yisomim. What should Rabbi Bar Shamshum do about his second loan? Right? Remember, again, he does have a second loan that is owed to him by the father, by the deceased father. So what should you do? When the kids go ahead, when the Yisomim grow up, you'll take them to Beis Din. In other words, again, I will say just in general, by the way, the halacha is that you can't collect anything from Yisomim when they're ketanim. Right? The only time that you could even litigate with the estate is when the Yisomim come of majority, when they become adults. So essentially, Abaye says to Rabbi Shamshum, I hear what you're saying, but number one, your migo doesn't work. Why doesn't your migo work? Because you could never have claimed that the land was sold to you because there was already a call that said that the land belonged, right? A common knowledge, situational awareness that the land belonged to the Yisomim. Land belonged to Yisomim. Therefore, halacha l'maaseh, your mi goes out the window. Rather, you got what you were supposed to get from the mashkanta de surah. As to the second loan of $5,000, when the Yisomim get older, you'll litigate with them. You'll go to Beis Din. Look, it's not going to be complicated. We'll say, why is it not going to be complicated? It's a pretty straightforward case. Rabbi Bar Shamshum has the document. So what is he going to have to do? What is he going to do? He's going to show up in Beis Din. He's going to go ahead and present the document. He's going to swear that he never received payment for this document. He's going to get paid. And Shalom Yisrael. That's it. So again, Abaye said, I appreciated what you wanted to do, but the approach is incorrect. Incredible. Great. Beautiful. Let's go weiter. Kreve was another great case. Kreve was it's also two profound Musar Haskels in this case. Number one is don't pass judgment until you get the full story. And when you want the full story, go to the source. Do not depend on secondary sources. And I will say, Musar Haskel number two is that when people are willing to talk things out and work through them, you can almost always get to resolution. Right? So again, Rabbi Bar Shamshum had his own cheshbon over here. When he spoke it out with Abaye, ultimately it showed that his cheshbon was wrong. And so Rabbi Bar Shamshum accepted. He gave back the land. And he waited till someone got older. He collected. When you're willing to dialogue about things and you're willing to really work on things like proper mention, there's almost no problem that you cannot come to resolution on. Two beautiful interpersonal lessons right from the beginning of today's daf. Let's go weiter. Kreve Rav Idi Bar Avin Shachel. Well, it's a really interesting case over here. Rav Idi Bar Avin's relative died. Okay, what happened? The Shavak Dikla. And what they leave behind? A palm tree. Okay? Clearly didn't have a good investment advisor, right? But left behind the palm tree. So it says, what happened? So now the shaila was, now here's what's interesting, is this relative apparently did not have any direct descendants. So Rav Idi Bar Avin Amar on a krivat tvei. So Rav Idi Bar Avin said, okay, after, I'm assuming this was after the Levaya, whatever, but maybe it was during the Levaya, right? So what happens? So after the Levaya, they go out and they argue, they're discussing who is the closest surviving relative who's going to get the palm tree. So Rav Idi Bar Avin says, I am. I'm the closest surviving relative. So we'll say now there was another family member who said that he was the closest surviving relative. Now, both say, I want to point out something very interesting. What happens in cases like this, right? So you have two people making competing claims, and neither one really has the ability to substantiate their claim anymore. So Rabbi Barabin says, I'm the closest relative. Other guy says, I'm the closest relative. So we've had a number of cases like this. And take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Also, Gavra Amra Ana Krive Tvei, it's about 2, 4, 6, 8, about 10 lines up from the bottom. Now again, this is one of these interesting halachic cases where there is no way to actually demonstrate or to prove who is the closer relative. So what's the halacha? Hichsik, and what happened? Hichsik osa ish bekarka lefishu olim yoser kedem Rav Nachman lekamei gabe ze omer shalavosai v'ze omer shalavosai kol de'olim gvar. Now I say we have not seen this explicitly yet. We're going to see this in Meretz Hashem in just a couple of days from now. Lamed Daled. Tomorrow. We're going to see it tomorrow, Meretz Hashem. So we'll say there's a concept called Kol Gvar. Now, Kol Gvar sounds like a very strange halachic resolution, and we'll get to it more tomorrow. Kol means whoever is stronger wins. Whoever is stronger wins. That there are certain times in halacha where you have a machlokes between people, both are advancing claims, and neither has the ability to substantiate the claim. So what does Beis Din essentially do in those kind of cases? What does Beis Din do? Beis Din says, you know what? Good. Now, we'll actually see what Kol De'olim Gvar is. Is Kol De'olim Gvar? Kol De'olim Gvar literally means whoever is stronger wins. Is that a psak or is it a siluk? Is that Beis Din paskani or is it Beis Din kind of removing itself, saying, you know what, guys, I don't know, go figure it out. So we'll get to that tomorrow. Point over here is, so the guy dies, we'll call him relative dies, leaves behind the palm tree. Rav Idi Bar Avin says, I am the closest inheritor. Other guy says, I am the closest inheritor. So what happens? Other guy takes possession of the palm tree. Okay, Rav Idi Bar Avin didn't fight, whatever it is, other guy takes possession. Fine. So what happens? This is great. L'sof, Odi Leida Ihu Karv Tvei. Listen to this. Afterwards, the other guy comes along and he says to Rav Idi Bar Avin, you know what? You're actually the closer relative. You're right. I lied, or I don't know if he lied, or he just new information came along, right? But Lamaisa, he said, you are the close relative, and he gives the palm tree to Rav Idi Bar Avin. Watch this. So Okma Rav Chisda Biyadei. So Rav Chisda then established Rav Idi as the owner. Now that the other guy admitted that Rav Idi was the closer owner, so ultimately Rav Idi is the owner. Fine. Listen to this. So Rav Idi Bar Avin says to the other guy, the other relative, right? I guess his cousin. He says to his cousin, okay, thank you for giving me the palm tree. And by the way, now you also owe me all the produce, the value of all the produce that you consumed from the time you took possession of the tree until now. In other words, Rav Idi Bar Avin is saying like this: now that you admit that I am the closer relative, that means the tree was mine already from the time that our joint relative, our common relative, died. You seized the tree unlawfully, and therefore, again, thank you for giving it back to me now, but you owe me back produce for everything that you consumed from the time that you took the tree until now. All right? So just listen to this, I will say. So this is all in front of Rav Chisda, right? So Rav Chisda is the one again. So apparently they were adjudicating this in front of Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda established Rav Idi Bar Avin as the owner of the tree. Rav Idi Bar Avin says, I want back produce. So this is interesting. Amar. So Rav Chisda said, Zeu she'omer ma'alav adam gadolhu. So it's interesting. Rav Chisda said about Rav Idi, this is who people say is a great man. So Rav Chisda, a little bit of a shtach over here, right? So Rav Chisda felt that, so let's just analyze. Rav Chisda essentially was saying, you're wrong. It's interesting the way that he phrases it. Right? This is the person speaking about Rav Idi Bar Avin. This is Rav Idi Bar Avin, who everyone says is such a great guy. Obviously, he's not so great, because this claim that he is making is ridiculous. After all, why? Aman ka samech mar ahai. So remember again, we'll say, let's go through this. See, Rav Idi Bar Avin, here's what's fascinating. Rav Idi Bar Avin was asserting the entire time that he was the rightful owner of the tree. Now what happens? The other guy said he was the owner of the tree, the relative. Then relative comes along and says, Rav Idi Bar Avin, you know what? You're the owner. So he gives it to Rav Idi Bar Avin. In Rav Idi Bar Avin's eyes, what happened over here was his initial claim was effectively accepted, and therefore retroactively he becomes the owner to the moment that the relative died. Rav Chisda essentially says, that's not what's happening over here. there's no halachic basis for this debate, right? Because you both were claiming different claims. Now the other relative comes along and says that you're the owner. So we'll say, so Rav Chisda says that's effectively as if the other relative has given Rav Idi bar Avin a gift. He's given him a gift. In other words, there's no halachic basis for this over here. So now he's saying you're the closer relative. Okay, so it's as if he's giving you a matana. Because he's giving you as a matana, you have the right to assert ownership from this point forward, but have absolutely no claim to anything retroactively. Take a look at Rashi. Before we get to Rashi, so the Gemara says, listen to this. Aman kasamech mar. Ahai, Rav Idi bar Avin, who are you basing your ownership on? You're basing your ownership on this other relative. Your other relative is saying that now it's yours. So the Gemara says, Hag the kamer, the ana mekarvetvei. So ultimately, again, look at Rashi. Aman kasam chis lezakos be'ilan. Rav Idi bar Avin, what are you basing your ownership on? What do you mean? Ahai, Rashi says, Haudas piv, Rav Sarashbam, Haudas piv, shemoda achshav sha'ata karav yoser. The relative is now saying, Rav Idi bar Avin, now you're the closer relative. This is the same guy who was saying this entire time up until this moment that he was the closer relative. But didn't call Dalam Gvar. He was rightfully entitled to consume the produce because he was the stronger of the two. They will say, this is fascinating. So ultimately, Rav Chisda says, you have to understand the mechanics of what's happening over here. When the relative comes along and says, Rav Idi, you know what, you're the closer relative. They will say, it's as if he's giving Rav Idi bar Avin a gift. In other words, he did not have to make that claim. He did not have to reverse course. In other words, he owned it. He owned it based on kol da'alim gvar. Whoever is stronger gets it. Now he's reversing course. Effectively, when he says Rav Idi bar Avin, you are the closer relative, he's giving a gift. Because he's giving a gift, ultimately, again, you have no claim for any past produce. So we'll say what's interesting to note over here is the point of contention between Rav Idi bar Avin and Rav Chisda is essentially how you view this hodah, how you view the admission of the relative that Rav Idi bar Avin was the closer relative. Rav Chisda viewed it as it's not even an admission, it's just a gift. It's just a gift. He's changing his mind, and he's essentially gifting Rav Idi bar Avin property. Okay, so he's gifting him a palm tree. Rav Idi bar Avin has no claim to anything beforehand. Rav Idi bar Avin was saying, no, when he's moded that I'm the closer relative, that means al hilchos Yerusha, I was entitled to that tree from the moment that our common relative died, and therefore any produce consumed by this other relative really belongs to me, and therefore he has to pay me back. That was the point of Machlokes. So Rav Chisda very dismissive of Rav Idi bar Avin's claim. So the Gemara says, listen to this. How does it? And last line of Lamed Gimel with Aleph, Abai v'Rava lo sir lehu dahad Rav Chisda. Abai and Rava disagreed with Rav Chisda. They felt Rav Chisda was wrong, and they felt Rav Idi bar Avin was right. Amud Beis, Kevan da Odi. They felt that once the relative admitted that he was not the closest relative, that he seized the palm tree unlawfully, and now he gave it back to Rav Idi bar Avin, not only did Rav Idi bar Avin get the palm tree, but what? But he was entitled to back produce as well. Look at Rashi. Kevan da Odi, Rashbam, the Shelo Kedin Hechsek Ad Ata. So this is the Machlokes, Rav Idi bar Avin, it's Rav Idi bar Avin, Abaye and Rava against Rav Chisda. How do we paskin? The Rambam paskins like Abaye, Rava, and Rav Chisda. So there's Rabbi saying in this kind of case, halacha l'maisa, the Rambam actually paskins that when the relative gave back the palm tree to Rav Idi bar Avin, the relative would be obligated to also give back any past produce that was consumed. That the admission of saying Rav Idi bar Avin was the closer relative required not only the transfer of the actual palm tree, but again, anything that was consumed since the other relative took possession of the palm tree unlawfully until the time that he returned it to Rav Idi bar Avin, had to be returned to Rav Idi bar Avin. Incredible. All right, Rabbi Salam, Gilon base 33b, 2 dots, let's go. Here we go. Similar to cases we had on Erev Shabbos. So what happens? Two people arguing, right? Reuven says, this field belongs to my forefathers. And Shimon says, this belongs to my forefathers. So they're both making the same claim. So hi, I see Sadi Davasi. So as I say, now watch this. So Ruvain brings witnesses that indeed the field belonged to his forefathers. V'hai I see Sadi the Achli Shnei Chazaka. And what happened? Shimon brings witnesses that he utilized the field for the years of Chazaka. So again, I will say we have this case. Which is Friday's case. So again, both making the same claim that the field belongs to our forefathers. Reuven brings witnesses to that point, that the field belonged to his forefathers. Shimon brings witnesses that he's been utilizing that field, occupying that field, and utilizing that field for 3 years. So now what do I do with this? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chisda, ma lo l'shaker. So Rav says, so ultimately, again, Rav Chisda says like this. The truth is, why would Shimon lie? Why would Shimon lie? After all, remember again, I will say, Shimon could have easily made a different taina. Well, Shimon didn't have to say the field belonged to my forefathers. What could Shimon have said? Shimon could have said, the field, I bought the field from you, or for that matter, again, I bought the fields from your forefathers, and I've gone ahead and I've lived through the years of Chazaka. And I will say, remember again, we've seen this before. Chazaka 101. Chazaka 101. Chazaka 101 requires 2 things. What are the 2 things? Number one, residency, right? Number 2, a taina, a claim. You always have to have a claim as to how you got this residency. So the Gemara says like this: we should definitely, now again, remember, Shimon's claim originally is that halacha l'maisa, this land belonged to his forefathers. He's unable to produce witnesses to support that claim. So instead, he brings witnesses that he's been there for the years of Chazaka. So Rav Chisda says we should believe Shimon. Why should we believe Shimon? Because Malal Shaker, why would he lie? Why would he lie? After all, he didn't have to make the claim that the field belonged to his forefathers. He could have easily made the claim that what? That Allah Chalamaisa, he bought this from Ruvain, or from Ruvain's forefathers. Right? So that's the taina. I bought it from you, and I've been here Chazaka. Right? And he has witnesses to support his Chazaka. That's a pretty strong claim. So that's the claim he could have made. The fact that now he makes a different claim that it belonged to my forefathers, so he should be believed als the migo. So the Gemara says, Abayi v'Rava lo svir lahadad Rav Chisda. So Abayi and Rava reject Rav Chisda. Why? Because they say, Mali l'shaker b'makom eidim lo amrina. Rabbi say we saw this already before. We don't say Mali l'shaker b'makom eidim. So Rabbi say this is a different kind of case. Why? Because at the end of the day, Ruvain has witnesses that the property belongs to his forefathers, and what? Shimon does not. Shimon does not. So therefore, again, I will say essentially, we don't say migo, we don't say mali l'shaker when there's competing and contradictory testimony. So therefore, I will say Abayi and Rava will say, it sounds like we're saying over here in this case, Abayi and Rava will say the halacha will side with Ruvain because Ruvain has testimony, Ruvain has witnesses solidifying the fact that what? That halacha l'maisa belonged to his forefathers. Now remember again, I just want to point out, I will say, had Shimon, this is important to understand, had Shimon from the beginning, said what? I purchased this field, Ruvain, from your forefathers, and I lived here Chazaka, then who would win? Shimon. Because Shimon has the taina, and Shimon has residency, right? He's got everything, right? But Lamaisa, that's not the claim that he's making, right? Instead, what he's saying is, Shimon's claim is, it belongs to my forefathers. What's the problem? Shimon can't support that claim. Ruvain can. Therefore, Allah Lamaisa, who wins? Ruvain. Now, I will say, remember again, what can't Shimon do in this case? What can't he do? He can't pivot, right? Now, I will say, remember again, we spoke about this concept last week. You could amend an initial claim, but you can't change it. Okay? So, in other words, if Shimon were to say, oh, yeah, no, you know what, I didn't mean that the land belonged to my forefathers. Rather, what I meant to say is, I actually bought it from your forefathers. Remember, again, we had this whole thing. So you could amend a little bit, but you can't totally change. In any event, so we'll say, so that's talach. So therefore, case number 2, Ruvain wins, because Ruvain is able to go ahead and furnish testimonial support for his claim. Shimon loses, because Shimon is unable to go ahead and furnish testimonial support for his claim. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Who da amrei? It's great cases. Who da amrei lechavre ma bois b'hai ara. We'll say, listen to this. A guy says to his friend, "What are you doing in my land?" Right? What are you doing in my land? My bois b'hai ara. So amrei minoch zabni v'achalti shnei chazaka. So we'll say, so now watch this. Reuven goes over to Shimon, and Reuven says, Shimon, what are you doing in my land? And Shimon says, what am I doing in your land? What are you doing? What am I doing in your land? I bought it from you, and I've lived here for the years of Chazakah. So we'll say, so this ultimately again is Shimon's claim. So again, I will say, so it sounds like sounds like the law would be leaning towards who? Towards Shimon, because remember again, he's got a taina. I bought it from you, and I've been living here the years of Chazakah. Now, obviously, I will say the claim by itself is meaningless, right? It has to be supported by eidos. So what happens? So azal aisi sahadi da'achla tarti shani. Very interesting. Shimon brings witnesses, but the witnesses only testify that what? That Shimon's been living there 2 years. 2 years. So the shaila now is, so what's the status? So we'll say this is very interesting. So Amar Rav Nachman, Hadra Ara, V'Hadra Peri. So again, Rav Nachman says it's not a shaila. So Shimon doesn't have any support for his claim. Therefore, what does Shimon have to do? Shimon has to go and give back the land to Reuven. But when he gives back the land to Reuven, he has to give back the land, vacate the land, and also give what? Give back produce that he consumed. Because now that he doesn't have any testimonial support that the land belongs to him, that means he illegally consumed the produce. Therefore, he has to give everything back, give back the land, and give back the produce. Ultimately, again, to Reuven. But I take a quick look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam, you see in the intermediate wide lines over there? So about, in the intermediate lines, about 4 lines up before it gets very wide. Amram Nachman Hadra Ara, Debetartin Shnun Lo Havi Chazaka. So he has to return the land, because remember again, 2 years is not enough to establish Chazaka. The Hadri Peri. And also you have to pay, you have to give back the produce. Rashi says, Shal Beis Hashanim Sha'acho Shalo Kidin, Dahalo Tan Meikara, now I will say we're going to see this actually very interesting. The reason he has to give back the peiros is why? Because remember, Shimon's whole time over here is that I am the owner of the land. So now, once that claim falls flat, right, and ultimately again he's not the owner of the land, that means he has no reason. He had no right to consume the produce. Okay, I'm going to say the rest of Rashbam a little bit later on. Fine. Rav Zvid says, however. This is very interesting. So this is like this. What happens if Shimon claims not that I went ahead and owned the land, but rather I was only on this land to consume produce. For example, I'll say, what does that mean? I'm a sharecropper. Right? So imagine the following case. Reuven comes over to Shimon, and Reuven says to Shimon, what are you doing on my land? So we'll say, so again, right, in the case that we started with, Reuven comes over to Shimon, what are you doing on my land? Shimon says, I bought it from you, and I've been here for the years of Chazakah. Shimon's only able to go ahead and bring up edus that he's been on the land for 2 years. Fails to reach the threshold of necessary testimony for establishing Chazakah. So Rav Nachman says, okay, Shimon, give back the land and give back any produce that you have consumed. Rav Zid says like this, what about a different case? Reuven comes over to Shimon, what are you doing on my land? Shimon says, what am I doing? I'm a sharecropper. So I've been working the land and I'm entitled to 1/3 of the produce. Rav Zid says, Ne'eman. Ultimately, in this case, Shimon is believed. Now, take a look at the Rashbam again for just a moment. So we'll say, so take a look in the wide lines, about 6 lines into the wide lines. Amar Rav Zvid, itoyin, milsa ba'ape nafshi. So this is now like a separate case. This is what it means to say. Listen to this. If originally when Reuven came to Shimon and he said to Shimon, what are you doing on my land? What are you doing on my land? Had Shimon not responded, I bought it from you. Rather, Shimon said, Shimon said, I'm a sharecropper. Kedin aris lemechza l'shlishul l'revia o shemacharteli peros ad eser shanim ne'eman. Ultimately, continuing the Rashbam, so Shimon is believed. B'ma she'achal l'mafreya u'b'shvuas hesis dizabninhu minei v'af agav de'ikas hadi dachnun l'peri v'she'en karka konoi lo t'lochotzif inish l'mechas la'ara l'chavrei u'lemecha piri d'charei b'chinam. So both say, now listen to this. Rav Zvid is introducing something new to us. New case. Reuven comes over to Shimon. What are you doing in my land? Shimon says, I'm a sharecropper. Shabbos says, so the halacha is, Shimon is believed. Now, the Rashbam adds in over here, Shimon is believed with the Shvuas Heses. He's got to swear, right? In other words, you need something to validate your claim, right? So if he doesn't have a document, a sharecropping document, or for that matter, again, any type of testimony, so Lamaisa, again, he needs a Shvua. But after he takes that Shvua, we believe him. Now, why do we believe him? So Rav Zvid bases his idea is that no one would ever be so chutzpahdik to go into someone else's field and just consume their produce. Right? That would be an unprecedented level of chutzpah, and therefore we assume that when Shimon makes the claim that he is Reuven's sharecropper, and he's willing to swear to that effect, that Allah Lamaisa we believe him. Just finish off the Rashbam. To lochatzif inish lamechas la'ara dechavre ulamechal peri dechavre bechinam kidim afarish ba'azil. So we'll say, so ultimately again this operates on the idea that a person is not so chutzpahdik to be able to just enter into someone else's field and to go ahead and consume their produce. However, the Rashbam adds in a very interesting qualification over here. He says, "Umihu mikanu lahabal lo yochal lo edim ushtar shekana peros deimkein kol adam yer lekarka chavero v'yochal leperos v'yochal peros shirarati." So, however, the Rashbam gives an interesting qualification over here. This only works retroactively. This does not work going forward. In other words, Rabbi said, let me frame what's happening over here. So Rav Zvid says like this. This is fascinating. Reuven comes over to Shimon. Shimon, what are you doing in my field? Shimon says, I'm a sharecropper. We had an arrangement. I get 1/3 of the produce. You get 2/3. I get 1/3. So Rav Zvid ultimately says that Shimon is believed. Shimon is believed. Now again, Shimon has to swear. Shimon has to swear Shavuos Hasis, and he's believed. Now, what does it mean he's believed? What does it mean? What's the ramification saying he's believed? What does that mean? He doesn't have to return any of the produce he has consumed. Now, that does not allow Shimon to continue to consume produce, right? Because at this point in time, Reuven's saying, get off my land, right? So remember again, so obviously, Shimon, you can't continue as a sharecropper if the owner of the field is saying, I don't want you here, right? But Lamaisa, at least not retroactively, but historically, retroactively, Shimon is believed ultimately to say that he is the sharecropper. Why? What is this based on? It's based on the idea that a person would never be so chutzpahdik to go into someone else's property and consume the produce of someone else for a sustained amount of time without the permission of the owner. Now let's go back to the Gemara. Let's see all of this inside. So I will say, by the way, you've noticed by the style of the Rashbam, is the Rashbam really gets ahead in the Gemara, kind of outlines the entire sugya. So Rashbam is incredibly thorough. Now let's catch up in the Gemara. So watch this. So that's one more time. Right? If Reuven comes over to Shimon and Reuven says to Shimon, what are you doing in my field? And Shimon says, I'm a sharecropper. Shimon is believed. Lav mi amrav Yehuda, hayman dinakit magla vitovila va'amar ezel igdere ledikla deplanya dezabni nehile mehemin. After all, Rabbi Yehuda said that if Shimon comes along and Shimon's walking with his knife and his rope, now what is he about to do? He is about to climb a palm tree to harvest dates. And we say, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? And he says, oh, Reuven hired me to go ahead and harvest his tree. We believe him. Now, the Rashbam points out over here, the case in question over here is where Reuven is not present. Reuven is not present. So we see Shimon walking with a rope and a knife towards Reuven's palm tree. We have no idea. Now we know that that's Reuven's tree. It's not Shimon's tree. So Shimon, what are you doing? Shimon says, oh, Reuven hired me to harvest the dates. What's the halacha? Shimon's believed. Shimon's believed. Why? The Gemara says, Alma lo chatzif inish de gazer dikla de lav didei. A person would never be so brazen to go and harvest a palm tree that's not his. That's not his. So again, so therefore halacha l'maisa, when we see Shimon going to harvest the palm tree of Reuven, ultimately, again, we believe him. So this is the assumption that a person is never going to be so chutzpahdik to go ahead and take the produce of someone else. Therefore, again, Rabbi kind of circled this back. That's why when Reuven comes over to Shimon, Reuven says, Shimon, what are you doing in my field? Shimon says, I'm the sharecropper. Shimon is believed with a shavua. He has to swear, but Shimon is believed because, again, Rabbi we're working with an assumption. Remember, again, Rabbi it's all based on the assumption. The assumption is a person would never be so chutzpahdik to go into someone else's field and just for a prolonged amount of time take their produce. So the Gemara says, so to over here in this case, when Reuven comes over to Shimon and Reuven says, Shimon, what are you doing in my field? Shimon says, I'm the sharecropper. We believe Shimon with a shvuah because a person would never be so chutzpahdik to go and take the produce of someone else. The Gemara says, Ihachi aranami. One second, I will say, so if that's the case, that you are relying on the fact that people are not so chutzpahdik to take stuff from people that does not belong to them, so why not go ahead and say that in the case where Shimon says, I bought the fields from you, we should believe Shimon also, to which the Gemara says, no. Ara, when it comes to land, amrina lei, achvi shtarech. Now let's say, no. When it comes to real estate purchases, what do we say? Okay, you say you're the owner of the land. Great. Show me your document. Show me your deed. Show me your deed. Remember, we'll say real estate is governed by a different set of rules. And whenever people sell real estate, there's always an accompanying deed. Ihachi aranama, Ihachi aranama ariamina le'achvi shtarech. Ihachi perinami. So the Gemara says, so if that's the case, again, that you say paperwork, please, right? You want, in other words, I'm not going to. In other words, when Reuven comes to Shimon and Shimon says, "You sold me the field," we don't just believe Shimon, but rather we say, Shimon, if you really bought the field, let's see the shtar. So why not say the same thing by Peiros? That when Reuven says to Shimon, what are you doing on my land? And Shimon says, I'm a sharecropper. Why do I say Shimon? Why don't you show me your document? Why don't you show me the document that says that halacha l'maisa again, that you have a sharecropping agreement? To which the Gemara says, leperi, law of the shtar leperi, law of the inshi. So we'll say, so apparently, whereas people never sell property without a shtar, when it comes to sharecropping agreements, people do enter those type of agreements all the time without shtar. So we'll say, so therefore, what comes out of here is something incredibly interesting. So it's really two different models over here. So model number one, where halacha, so remember, how do we start this case? Reuven comes over to Shimon. Shimon, what are you doing on my land? Shimon makes a taina, you sold it to me, and I've been here the years of chazaka. The problem is, Shimon only produces witnesses that say that he lived there for 2 years. What's the halacha? Shimon has to give back the land and also has to give back any produce that he consumed. Okay. What happens if Reuven comes over to Shimon? Shimon, what are you doing on my land? Shimon says, I'm a sharecropper. So we'll say, incredible, Rav Zvit teaches us, what's the halacha? Shimon is believed. Again, Rashbam adds in, Shimon has to swear that he's the sharecropper, right? But Lamaisa, once he swears, he's believed. What's the logic? So we'll say, the whole logic of this is that what? That people would never be so chutzpahdik to go ahead and seize someone else's produce for a prolonged amount of time. Same idea. We see Shimon walking over to Reuven's palm tree. Reuven's not around, with a rope and with a knife ready to harvest trees. Say, Shimon, what are you doing? Oh, Reuven hired me to harvest this tree. What do we say? Okay. Right, that's lacha. Because lo chatzifinish, a person would never be so chutzpahdik to go ahead and seize someone else's produce, especially again over a prolonged amount of time, and a vaima produce. That's what all of this is based on. The other nugget of information that the Gemara just gave us is no one ever sold property without a shtar, but it was common to enter into sharecropping agreements without a shtar. So therefore, again, when Reuven goes ahead and says, or Shimon says, Reuven sold me the property, we say, okay, where's your shtar? But yeah, when Shimon says, Reuven hired me to be a sharecropper, there's no shtar. Okay, we'll say last case for today. We're going to start it, then we're going to end kind of in the middle of it. Great cases. A man says to his friend, Ma bo'is bahai ara. What are you doing on my land? I will say, by the way, it's always fascinating, right? How the lashon of the Gemara is always, right? One guy is saying to his friend, what are you doing on my land? You know what I'm saying? The whole essence of Klal Yisrael is chaverim kol Yisrael, even when there are disputes. Right? The chevrashaft, the friendship has to be there, even when we're like, what are you doing on my land? There's a way to disagree agreeably, and there's a way to go and have machlokes, but yet still be chaverim. That's the piece. You know, we've been struggling to figure out this piece for 2,000 years since we lost the Beis Hamikdash. Halavel b'zochim eretz Hashem to figure it out soon, and that's chus be given our third base. So Gemara says as follows: Hu da'amrei l'chavrei. So a guy says to his friend, "You're still my chaver, even though I'm saying my boys bahai ara. What are you doing on my land?" So right, Reuven says to Shimon, "What are you doing on my land?" What does Shimon say? This is great. So Amrlei minach zavint va'achlu say shnei chazaka. So we'll say, here we go. So Shimon says, Reuven, I bought it from you, taina, and also I've been here for the years of chazaka, residency. Okay. So now we'll say, what happened in this case? I see chat sa'ada da achla tlas shani. So this is interesting. Shimon brings only one witness. So he brings an eid echad, that he's been living there for 3 years. Okay, so we'll say, so now what do you do with this case? Now again, so we'll say, so remember again, it's interesting, like in the previous case, Shimon brought 2 witnesses, but that he was only there 2 years. Now in this case over here, Shimon's bringing 1 witness that he's been there for 3 years. So what do we do? So the Gemara says, Hainu naska d'Rabbi Abba. So we'll say, so the rabbi said, this is the classic case of naska d'Rabbi Abba. So we'll say, now naska literally again is like a piece of silver. This is the classic case of the piece of Silber and Rabbi Abba. What happened in the case of Rabbi Abba? So let's listen to this. There was a guy who took a piece of silver from his friend. So what happened? They brought the case before Rabbi Ami. And what happened? So ultimately, again, Rabbi Abba was sitting there as well. I see chad sahada the michtiv chat famine, and he had brought one witness, and I will say again, and the one witness that he took the silver. So let me give names over here, right? So what happened? So Reuven had a piece of silver. Shimon came and took the silver. So they come before Rabbi Abba. Or I should say they came before Rabbi Ami, but Rabbi Abba was there as well. What happens? So sure enough, Reuven goes ahead and brings an Eid Echad, and the Eid Echad says that Shimon took the silver from me. So what happened? Amrle in. So Shimon says, yes, I took the silver, however, in Chatvi, vididi Chatvi. I took the silver, but you know what? It was my silver. So Shimon admits that he took it, ultimately again, but he says it was mine. So therefore the Gemara will say, today we're going to stop over here, stop over for today. I'm leaving you a little bit on a cliffhanger, but the Gemara is suggesting that this case of Reuven comes over to Shimon and says, Shimon, what are you doing on my land? Shimon says, I bought it from you and I consumed it for the years of Chazakah. Shimon brings in Eid Echad, one witness that says that he consumed it for 3 years. The Gemara says, this is the case of Naska the Rabbi Abba. This exact same case. What the two cases have to do with each other, how they align with one another, and halacha l'maisa b'osai b'shal tov mitzlachos tomorrow. Shkoyach, everyone. Couple of short topics ahead of us the next couple of days. Tosas Rashbam, or just later start. We'll see. Jack, good morning. How are you?
Good to see you.
It's great to see you.
in Israel today.
Oh, beautiful.
I hope
For how long?
all the flights.